Somewhere in your camera roll there is a photo of a mountain, maybe the Alps, maybe a cliff in Greece. That rock is not European. It did not form here. It did not form on this side of the planet. You were standing on the wreckage of a continent that vanished. Geologists call it Greater Adria, roughly the size of Greenland. Almost nobody hiking those trails knows what they are walking on. It was a real continent with real coastlines. It had beaches and reefs and shallow lagoons, and then the planet swallowed it whole. Then it was destroyed, not sunk, not flooded, destroyed, shoved underneath another continent, and swallowed whole by the planet itself. This is the story of how you lose an entire continent, and the strange detective work that finally found the pieces again. Rewind to Pangaea, when nearly all land on Earth was fused into one enormous supercontinent surrounded by a single, vast global ocean. Around 240 million years ago, that supercontinent began to tear itself apart along enormous rifts opening in the crust. As Pangaea tore apart a long strip of crust peeled off northern Africa, that strip is Greater Adria, and it went its own way. Picture a landmass roughly the size of Greenland breaking free and beginning a slow journey north across an ancient sea. It drifted north across an ancient ocean called Tethys. For most of its life, it was not dramatic. Much of it sat quietly underwater. Greater Adria drifted for tens of millions of years, slowly, a few centimeters a year, about the speed your fingernails grow. For most of its life, it was not dramatic at all. No great mountains, no vast forests. Much of it sat quietly underwater. It was a drowned continent, an enormous shelf of crust lying just below the surface of a warm, shallow tropical sea. And that detail matters more than anything else in this story, because being underwater is exactly what preserved the evidence. If Greater Adria had stayed high and dry, we would probably have no idea it ever existed at all. Warm, shallow seas, turquoise water you would pay serious money to swim in today. And in that water, things died constantly for millions of years. Not dramatic deaths, just the endless, quiet rain of tiny organisms sinking to the seafloor when their short lives ended. Plankton, algae, corals, shellfish, creatures with hard mineral skeletons made largely of calcium carbonate. Trillions of tiny shelled organisms sank to the seafloor layer after layer. Compressed over time, that becomes limestone. Remember the limestone? Layer on layer on layer. Over tens of millions of years, those sediments piled up kilometers thick across the drowned continent. Squeezed under their own weight, they hardened into pale gray stone. The same stone quarried for cathedrals and carved into statues. That limestone is light, much lighter than the dense rock beneath it. Hold that thought, because it is about to save everything. Because as Greater Adria kept drifting north, it was heading straight toward Europe, and Europe was not moving out of the way. Around 100 million years ago, they met. When two plates collide, one usually loses. The denser one bends down and slides underneath. Geologists call that subduction. It is the single most destructive process operating on the surface of this planet. The losing plate bends downward and begins sliding beneath the winner at an angle, down into the hot interior of the Earth. It gets dragged into the mantle hundreds of miles down into heat and pressure that would erase almost anything. Greater Adria lost badly. Temperatures past 1,000 degrees, pressures that crush rock into entirely new minerals. Nothing survives that intact. Almost the entire continent went under, pulled into the earth like a rug fed slowly into a shredder. but shredders are never clean. Something has to give, and what gives is whatever is sitting loosely on top of the descending slab. That limestone sitting on top was too light to sink. As the continent went down, the upper layers were scraped off and crumpled violently. Imagine dragging a carpet under a door. The carpet goes through. The dust and crumbs on top get scraped into a heap. They stacked against the edge of Europe like snow piling in front of a plow. Those crumpled scrapings became mountains you can visit today. Folded, overturned, stacked upside down in places, the neat horizontal layers of an ancient seabed twisted into something unrecognizable. The Apennines down the spine of Italy, chunks of the Alps, parts of the Balkans, and Greece and Turkey. A dead continent's leftovers. Every one of those ranges is built partly from the scraped-off skin of a continent that no longer exists as a continent. The rest is still down there, slabs sitting up to 1,000 miles deep inside the mantle, and we can actually see them. You cannot dig that far. The deepest hole humans have ever drilled reaches about 12 kilometers. That is barely a scratch. So instead, you wait for earthquakes. Every quake sends waves through the entire planet at slightly different speeds. Those waves travel right through the core and out the other side, and arrive at monitoring stations all over the world. Cold, dense, old crust slows those waves. Collect enough readings and you build a three-dimensional scan of the inside of the Earth. It works on exactly the same principle as a medical scan. Send energy through something opaque and read what comes out, changed. Geologists call it seismic tomography. Decades of earthquake recordings assembled into a picture of a planet's insides. Under the Mediterranean, they found them. Cold, dense slabs sitting deep in the mantle, shaped exactly like a continent dragged down. But a scan only tells you something is buried down there. It does not tell you what that something used to look like. For that, the researchers had to do something close to absurd. They went and mapped the mountains. All of them. More than a decade of fieldwork across roughly 30 countries: Spain, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Iran, fragment by fragment. For every piece of rock they recorded its age, its chemistry, where it sat, and most importantly, its magnetism. Magnetic minerals lock onto north as rock hardens. Every stone is a frozen compass still pointing where north was that day. Line up enough frozen compasses and you can work out where a fragment originally sat and how far it has rotated since. Then you run the whole thing backwards. Unrotate every piece. Uncrumple every fold. Rebuild a continent from confetti. And when the reconstruction finally came together, it showed something nobody quite expected. Greater Adria was not swallowed in one clean bite. It was torn apart in stages, twisted, rotated, shredded along several boundaries at once over tens of millions of years, which explains why the mountains of southern Europe are such a chaotic tangle compared with almost anywhere else on Earth. That mess is not random. It is a record, the geological wreckage of a slow-motion collision that is still going on. And the collision never stopped. Africa still pushes north. That crushed zone is why southern Europe still shakes and still erupts. Give it another 50 million years, and the Mediterranean may close completely. A new mountain range where the sea is now. Here is what stays with me. Greater Adria was never hidden. It is in the cliffs above beach towns and the stone of old churches. People quarried it and climbed it and photographed it for thousands of years. It was never lost. We just never knew what we were looking at.